Nice of you to join us.
Great to be here.
Welcome to the new studio.
The Signal. You are listening to The Signal.
The Signal.
Cutting through the noise.
You are listening to The Signal.
Welcome to The Signal, episode 1. I'm Fergus.
And I'm Tom Trewinnard.
Let's get on with the meat of episode 1, which means we need to talk about what we're going to do on this show and who we're going to talk to.
Why are we here?
Why are we here? Why are we here?
We think that we've had this really interesting experience over the last few years of speaking to people working at the intersection of journalism and media and technology all over the world. And some of those conversations are really fascinating, very inspiring, often very honest and challenging. And
sometimes really depressing.
And sometimes it can be depressing.
Yeah.
But we want to, share some of those conversations with you all. We're going to have some really exciting guests.
But we're not just going to whinge. This is not a whinge fest. We're going to talk about solutions, not just the problem. So if we identify a problem, then we have to couple it with talking about a solution or someone who's found a solution.
Stop whinging bat signal.
Yes, we're not going to do that anymore. There's plenty, if people want that, there's plenty of places that they can get that. We're going to be talking to industry insiders, observers, those who are kind of in it, those who are outside of it, looking in, people with interesting things to say, but no one gets to come on the show and talk about something and be unchallenged.
Yes. Yeah, we want to keep the conversation real. I think those are the conversations that we enjoy the most. There's a lot of space in our industry to have quite superficial conversations, and we're quite good at patting ourselves on the back frequently. This is not that. We're going to be trying to do something different.
Absolutely no patting ourselves on the back. We also want to make sure that this show has people's voices that we don't often hear. And so we've described this as a show having a global perspective. We're really going to leverage our contacts and our network in order to get voices in from global majority, from all the corners of the world that we work.
And occasionally we'll be coming live or not live from various exotic locations as we travel to do the work that we do, helping people who are trying to drive creative change in journalism. We'll be sharing what we're learning along the way.
Yeah. So that's a useful segue into what we're going to talk about today, because we're going to kind of start at the very beginning, start at the basics, start maybe with the thing that kind of excites us, but also drives us crazy, and it's this word, innovation. I was talking. This is kind of the behind the scenes here. I was talking to someone about what we even mean by innovation when I was with them last week. Content for the show. The audio completely failed. That innovation completely failed.
Perfect.
We will talk to them another time, but I thought we would have that conversation here where the audio definitely will not fail. So the kind of starting thing is innovation is chucked around. This phrase innovation is chucked around all over the place within the news industry, within the media industry, information, content, creators, AI. What we use it, but the industry uses it. What do we think people mean by innovation? What do you think people mean by innovation? I know what I think people mean.
I'm not sure. But I remember really early in when we started Fathom, which is independent news lab and consultancy, where a lot of what we're trying to do ostensibly is helping people innovate. And I remember us having a conversation where I was kind of bristling against the term innovation, because I think it gets so used that it kind of loses a lot of meaning.
But what do you think it should mean? What are we losing with overusing it?
Well, here's what I think happens a lot of the time. Innovation becomes a synonym for doing something with a new piece of technology. So that, I think, is a lot of what we hear about when we hear about innovation. At the moment, it's a lot around AI in the newsroom, Gen AI, a lot around creators. But when I think of innovation, I think we should try and really sort of decouple it from technology and from trends. I think it's a new way of trying to do something or trying to build something, and it's not necessarily high tech. It can be low tech. And when I think of some of the most interesting, in kind of innovative things that we've done with some of the newsrooms we work with, actually, it's been very not flashy, but really creative.
We'll go through the list of what we think kind of is innovation, not innovation in a moment. What I think innovation is, I feel very similar to you. I think innovation is genuinely doing something new. The bit that I haven't quite worked out, and I'm prepared to give people leeway on this, is whether innovation, doing something new is innovative if it's the first time you've done it or the first time that anyone's done it. So I think true innovation is really doing something new that no one else has done. I think within our industry, innovation becomes this kind of cover-all for anything that you're doing that's new, that's for your organization or for you as an individual. And that's realistically not innovation. It's exciting, it's great, it's good for business, it's good for your organization, it's good for your personal development. Is it really innovation? Should we actually be saving that for other purposes? Should we preserve that word and roll it out when it's useful to be rolling it out?
My general stance is that I don't really want to describe myself as innovative. I quite like it if other people describe things that we do or that we've worked on as innovative. But I think if you're sort of like self-describing as innovative, then can be a bit of a kind of a red flag.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Okay, but we've just launched a podcast where there is going to be some talking about ourselves, and we don't have to blow our own trumpets, but we have worked on things with other people that I think have been truly innovative, and we have seen them. Like
other people have said it,
other people have said it, so it's fine. So just some of the things that we've worked on that I would class as innovative on our part is we worked on when rich communication services. We worked with directly with some product teams at Google to help launch a new form of interactive journalism using RCS, rich communication services, on mobile phones that allowed publishers to create carousels and kind of interactive stories. Was super innovative for about 2 months. and then
ChatGPT arrived.
Yeah, and then ChatGPT arrived, and everyone's experience with the chatbot was far superior to what we could achieve with what we were doing. But that was innovative.
Yeah, and I think what was innovative about that was not necessarily the technology itself. What was innovative about it was that we're giving publishers who have for years sort of outsourced all their distribution to social platforms a way to build a direct connection with their audiences. And in a similar vein, when I was thinking about what I think of as innovative, and a sort of like the counterintuitive example is when we worked with an African newsroom to build a mobile magazine that was delivered via WhatsApp. It was a PDF that came through WhatsApp. Super low tech, but the innovation in terms of how that magazine was designed and how it was being delivered to audiences, I think was really strong. And that is a very close example to RCS, which is, ostensibly high tech innovation. But both of those things to me count equally. And I think there's lots of innovation that is not building really complex, fancy things on new technologies, but is using some old technologies in creative ways to do something that hasn't been possible before. And now we see WhatsApp magazines are pretty common. I think The Continent is doing that. Like, people have really picked up and run with the idea because that's where the audiences are.
So beyond ourselves doing some innovative things according to other people, what do you think is particularly innovative right now? Like, and I want you to qualify why it's innovative.
To be honest, I'm a bit worried about innovation right now because I think some of the Gen AI tools have made it really easy for people to build really early stage prototypes really easily. So people who are not technical can use a tool like Google's Gen AI Studio to test something that they weren't otherwise able to do. And there's kind of a little bit of innovation there. But I guess my concern is that the level of thought into sort of what we're building and prototyping is still a little bit conservative. And I think the tech is allowing us to do really exciting new things. We need to be pushing to the boundaries of kind of what's possible, not developing shinier ways of doing things that we've been doing for 10 years.
I think you said that innovation was for you about technology, but not always technology. I think actually there's been quite a lot of innovation around business models, and I think the WhatsApp PDF delivery is a good example of an innovation around business model. I think what Zetland are doing in Denmark, they're a long form news publisher. Everything is audio recorded, narrated by the reporter. They've launched that successfully in Denmark. They've now launched it in Finland. They're looking at I think they've launched it in Norway or about to. They've
launched it somewhere else.
They've launched it somewhere else, Norway or Germany. They're looking at other places. And I think that model, they've shown it's successful. And their model is the innovative thing is how they've created this feeling about what they're going to be launching in the country before they do it. So whether they're going to Norway or Germany or Finland or Denmark, they are creating a buzz. They are getting the buy-in. They are basically creating the business before they have to create the business. And I think we've seen a similar thing with Mill Media.
Yeah,
they are now they are started in Manchester, local news site. Then went to London. Now they're currently building a campaign for launching in Leeds.
I think they're in Liverpool, Sheffield, Birmingham. London was actually a later addition for them, but yeah, and I think this is a great example of innovation, right? It's actually basically doing something that was very old and traditional, of kind of really high quality, human driven local journalism. Now, but that kind of had faded away for a long time in the UK, and Joshi and the team there identified that this was missing, and that actually it's something that people would pay for. So the thing that's amazing about the Mill is that it's almost entirely reader funded. They're sustainable. I don't know if they're profitable yet, but they're close, I think. And it's not a new idea, right? It's innovation. It's not a new idea. It's an old idea, but the timing, the way that it's been brought back, actually represents something really important.
So I think looking forwards, I want to see more innovation in the business model side of things. We, on this show, will talk about creators a lot. There's so much to explore about the innovative ways they have approached revenue generation. That's like about 10. That's probably a special limited spin-off series that we could talk about that. But I think we might see innovation or an approach to innovation in the news industry along those lines. I do want to reverse ferret a little bit on the innovation side, because
Fergus loves a good reverse.
I love
That's
a good
going to be a
reverse
phrase
ferret.
that comes back.
I think that when we've worked with smaller organizations and you see them doing something, yes, that other people have done, but the introduction of that way of working is truly innovative within their organization. They are seen as the trailblazers because it is actually transforming that introduction of a piece of technology or that introduction of a new way of doing things is transformative, and it's genuinely a new thing for so many people that they interact with. I do think that's important. An example would be an organization in the UK that was playing with AI, and then they embraced it. Then they started to experiment with it, and then that experimentation led to company-wide buy-in and interest. And then they now describe themselves as like an AI-first organization. Like that to me felt innovative. It wasn't actually about the technology, it was the way that it was introduced.
Yeah. I think innovation in smaller organizations can sometimes actually be the thing that really pushes the boundary without wanting to pat ourselves on the back. But back in 2011, there was quite a small group of people who thought maybe there's a useful way of journalistically looking at videos from the Middle East and the Arab Spring, verifying them and making them usable for news organizations. You were doing that at a big newsroom. A lot of the other people doing that early on were not at big newsrooms. There was Brown Moses, who became Elliot Higgins, that became Bellingcat. There was Maliki Brown, who was a startup called Storyful. And there was kind of, I think, sort of people a little bit on the edges of the mainstream who saw this opportunity, and because they were somewhere where they didn't have a big, heavy institution that they had to persuade that this was something useful, they could just run with it. And now Maliki is winning Pulitzers and Emmys at the New York Times. Like if you think nowadays, I think what Sunita Raghu is doing has been doing at Scroll, which is a relatively small newsroom in India. She's really pushed the boundaries of what liquid content means, and how does Gen AI
and liquid content being kind of not thinking about storytelling in a specific format or shape, but thinking about the kind of
whatever the reader wants. Should it be a calculator? Should it be a mind map? Should it be an FAQ?
Yeah.
Sunita's kind of built that in a really interesting way. She's not at one of the massive newsrooms with lots and lots of money to invest in this stuff, but because they're small and nimble and they can move quickly, they've been really successful.
So my last question then around innovation is what does it take for someone to be an innovator, or like what's the characteristics, or what's the what makes an innovator?
I think there's kind of like obvious ones like creativity and I guess a kind of a curiosity. But I think maybe the less obvious things are you have to be very determined, because you can have a lot of good ideas, but the actual work that you have to do to see them through and then to persuade people that this is a good idea can be a really long slog. So actually there's a kind of like an element, yes, of the, ethereal brilliance and creativity, but then you've got to back that up with just a kind of determined, hard slog.
I was gonna say the same thing. I think, or something similar, which is, innovation is not just thinking about it or identifying like, oh, that would be cool. It's about turning that thought into an action that leads to a change.
Yeah,
and I think that takes drive, and I think it takes confidence, and I think it takes a little bit of a leap, because you are trying to persuade someone that this new thing is useful, valuable, worth pursuing before it's been proven. And I think within the news and journalism industry, that is really hard, because everyone likes to have the cover of safety, which is what have other people done, or what have the flagship brands done already, because that's what we should be doing, instead of being the first ones to do it.
Yeah. I think the idea is the easy bit, right?
Yeah.
I think for the most part, it's then sort of like, how do you make that a reality?
Tom, let's get into some of the things that we've read this week or over the last few months, because there's always a lot and change is happening very quickly. Something that I saw that I was looking at this morning, which I think is quite close to both of our hearts. It's this this news that some publishers are limiting access to the Internet Archive. This was something that Neiman Lab covered. What do you have been a very big advocate for Internet Archive. Why don't you just explain what it is first?
Yeah, so Internet Archive is an amazing and a little bit eccentric nonprofit who many years ago decided that what they were going to do was try and archive the whole internet and make that available to anybody, so that I can go and look at a website. I can see what bbc.co.uk looked like right when it was first launched. So in many ways, it's like the kind of, you can trace back the aesthetics of the internet, and it's actually really fun to go back and look at what the first news websites
I wonder
looked like.
if my MySpace page is on that.
Some enterprising listener is in for a shock.
Go and tell me. Yeah.
The reason that Fergus and I and others have been big advocates for it is because we were part of this wave of people trying to use open source information to verify and investigate all kinds of misinformation, disinformation activities. And the Internet Archive, the Wayback Machine, which is the way that you can kind of navigate it, was really useful to see when did a website start? How long has it been around? When has it been changed? Has this thing been tweaked here? Why are some publishers now blocking it?
And we'll link to the full story in the show notes, but publishers are worried that actually they see that one of the frequent visitors to their sites is the Internet Archive, and there is now a worry that those who are blocking scrapers that are fueling LLMs are going to use the Internet Archive as a way of getting that content through a backdoor for scraping, and so they're stopping access to the archive. But there is this. I mean, we hear it all the time, and you sometimes you think about this kind of like what is truth and what is the source of truth, and often newspaper articles are that kind of historical. They are all the time the historical record, and with printed papers not declining and having not been in circulation for a long time, and in some places, and digital journalism being where that record is, if an organization folds, removes its archive, or is taken over or something like that, then we don't have that record. And so if the Internet Archive is not capturing new content, then there's a potential problem.
Yeah, I think so. And I can understand why, from the publisher's perspective. The New York Times is suing OpenAI. Many big publishers are suing many different providers because they feel like their copyrighted work was taken and used in the training of these models in a way that was not agreed upon or paid for. So I can understand why... Allegedly, to be decided in the courts. Yeah. I can understand why the publishers are keen to protect their content, the output of their work, the thing that costs them a lot of money to do. But yeah, there is this kind of, there's a public interest.
And it's very open to misuse, because there may be some bad actors out there who don't necessarily want a record of what they're doing all the time, because they might change it and change what that record is. And so it's particularly worrying. You've been reading a lot about prediction markets.
Yes, oh my word. This is a very hot topic right now. And I was trying to wrap my head around it because I'd seen that the AP had done a deal with Kalshi. And I was like, what does it mean for a prediction market to do a deal with a major publisher?
What is a prediction market?
Prediction market, I'm going to speak specifically about Kalshi and Polymarket. These are ways where I can go and place a bet basically on anything. I can say, what are the odds that it will rain today in Manchester? And I can say it will rain. Somebody else might take the slightly riskier but more lucrative bet, it will not rain. So it's very kind of adversarial. It creates these mini markets around facts and information. Sports is one of the kind of obvious use cases here, but also more recently things like wars. And so I was really curious to try and understand why is the AP and others, CNBC and I think CNN have also done deals. And basically the deal is that these prediction market platforms get access to the data from the newsrooms. So in the AP's case, it's all around election. The AP is the gold standard of election data in the US. They will now be providing that to the prediction markets, which then lets the prediction markets settle the decisions and the bets that are being made.
Yeah, but there's this worry that journalists are going to have to change the way that they write so that there is absolutely no ambiguity in anything. And reporting doesn't work like that. Sometimes you don't know the exact, these bets are so specific, aren't they? So sometimes that detail is not in the reporting. And there was one big bet recently where, people who'd been placing these bets were harassing an Israeli journalist to update their story because it wasn't clear enough as to, it was a missile, a fragment of a missile landing, and did it explode on impact or had it exploded before impact?
Exactly. It's a fascinating story, and this poor journalist was who's the defense correspondent for the Times of Israel, was being harassed and even receiving death threats because. Do you know how much money was placed on?
I know it was a lot.
It was $14 million was placed on the question of what date will Iran strike Israel. And this was the moment when, if this was a missile landing just outside Jerusalem, that bet would have resolved. And the people on the other side of that bet were not happy that this journalist had said, there's been a missile strike. And so they were trying to say, it was a missile that was intercepted and there was fragments of that. So it doesn't count as a missile strike. But I mean, firstly, terrifying that journalists are then being harassed and threatened. We've also seen this in the sports betting market with athletes being threatened and receiving harassment because somebody's lost a bet based on their performance. But just on the deals side, I thought this was interesting because there's kind of a parallel here, I think, with the deals that are happening between the AI companies and publishers, which is that there's value and value being attributed to the data of journalism.
Yeah.
Not necessarily the stories, but the facts, the work and the fact that that's been done by a reputable organization. And I think this, so in the same way that the big AI platforms are doing deals with publishers for inference data, sometimes for training, the prediction markets they need that data. And I think it sort of starts to see a little bit of a shift from journalism as an article or as a piece to TV, and maybe there's a different layer of value in the journalism, which is the reported fact.
Yeah.
And but then the question is, how do you capture that? How do you communicate that?
And we were worried that we wouldn't have anything to talk about on our first podcast. We will explore these in a lot more detail. Let's try and get someone on the podcast who has been on the receiving end of some of this. Polymarket.
I have one final thing.
Okay. What's your one final thing?
When is it going to happen that, one of the things we've seen on prediction markets is that there was a massive, basically, spike in bets that the US was going to strike Iran right before it did. And it seems suspicious that there were so many bets placed. And so there's kind of an element of insider trading here. Journalists have access to information that is often not publicly privy. At some point, a journalist will take a bet on a prediction market and then publish their story and make a lot of money. And that will be tempting for people. So there's like a really big ethical tension. And I think that also plays out in, should these big publishers be doing these deals with these companies that sort of invite that kind of tension? I don't have an answer.
So it turns out we did have a lot to talk about in episode 1. We're going to talk a lot more about a lot more of this in future episodes. We're weekly. We're wherever people get their podcasts. Everything that we talk about is going to be shared in show notes. The links to the stories and the evidence and the truth will be in there for people. So you need to subscribe at the link in the description, and we'll see you for the next episode.
See you next time.
For more information on who we are and what we do, as well as what we're thinking about and who we're talking to, subscribe to our newsletter and find us on YouTube. All the details are in the show notes. Thanks for listening. We do want to hear from you, so please leave us a comment and share your thoughts and suggestions on The Signal on YouTube, Apple and Spotify.